In Photoshop, we have three tools grouped together in the toolbox called Dodge, Burn and Sponge. Now it could be argued that what these tools do is better able to be done in Adobe Camera Raw while we're working on the original RAW image. Now there's no doubt that this is true, but it's not unusual to spot the need for small tweaks at the end of the editing process or even a day or so later, and in those circumstances these tools will do the job pretty well. We're human, and sometimes when we're in full creative flow we miss something which we see the next morning. Dodging and burning lightens or darkens parts of the image, but we can target highlights, midtones or shadows which make these tools pretty effective. Along with the sponge tool for saturation and desaturation, they all work from a brush, and a basic soft edge brush meets all of my needs. Now, taking this image as an example, I was just about to resize this image for a Camera Club competition, and I started to look at the water on the left hand side, asking myself the question, did I get that dark enough? Well, I'm going to do a little bit of burning in that area of the highlights. So I'm going to select the tool from the toolbox, click and hold, and the three tools will appear. When we choose a tool, it will sit on the top of the stack until we decide to change it. It means that these tools all work from a brush, so we have that nice convenient way of increasing and decreasing the size of the brush using the square bracket keys to the right of the letter P. From the options at the top of the screen, on this occasion, I do need to select highlights. I think probably the most critical part of using this tool is the exposure that you can see in the top of the screen, because if we set the exposure too high, let me do that deliberately. As soon as we touch our brush onto the page, we can sometimes have the effect run away with us. I'll hit Ctrl Z and you can see that change. If we start with a setting of 5 or 10%, it's much more measured. It's not critical. I've got 8% there and I'm sure it's going to be fine. But what it allows us to do is to go over these areas a number of times, and it makes the tool much more measured in the way we apply it. Now you'll notice that I went up to the top there and I moved the slider here, but I find it much more convenient to use the numbers on the keyboard. So if I type or hit 05, you can see I've just dialed in an exposure of 5%. If I wanted 10%, I touch the 1 key. Very, very convenient and easy to change. So let's go back to 05. I've got quite a big brush here, but you can see I've got a few little light patches here. Let me start to apply some burning on these areas. And because I'm being able to target these areas with the brush, I can do exactly what it suggests. I can target them. I can keep away from the areas that don't need it, but apply it more in the areas that do. It's very quick to do all around the image in any areas I now perceive I left a little weaker than I should have done. And as you can see, I'm moving right the way over to the right hand side. We can use this tool to make these small changes quickly and easily. Now with the spinning round of the screen, I've reset my image. I've made a layer copy using Ctrl J, and I've done a little bit of burning of the highlights around the image so that I can turn this layer on and off, and you can see a before and after. So you can see I'm not making significant changes here, but just a couple of touches. And yes, I could go back into Adobe Camera Raw, but we're not doing any damage to our image with a little bit of burning in this context. So what we can also do, of course, is to select either midtones or shadows if we wanted to burn those a little bit. Here maybe we could take a look at dodging. I do need to select the layer I'm going to work on, so I'll be working on the layer that I darkened previously. Going over to my toolbox, I'm going to select the dodge tool, and I need to select shadows from the options here, and I think I'll leave the exposure at about 10%. I do need to zoom in. Now this is a white-bellied sea eagle, and as you can see the eyes are quite dark, unlike the ospreys where the eye is a nice bright yellow and much more appealing. So here maybe as a last resort, a second thought, I'd like to raise the tones a little bit. So I've got my brush fairly small and I can start to brush over the eye here just to lift them, looking at what I'm doing as I'm doing it, trying to make sure I don't take it too far. I mean, there's other areas we could do if we felt it was appropriate. But of course, while I'm lightening areas, there's a mid-tone on the beak and around here. If I wanted to draw a little bit of attention to that, if I switch to the mid-tones, then maybe I can lift those a little bit. You can see it's marginal what I'm doing, but it does make the difference. So here, if I was just to turn that top layer on and off, you can see the difference we've made around the outer edge. But if you look carefully at the head of the bird, you can see the minimal changes that I've made, but often worth it. Now here I've opened up another image and we're going to use the sponge tool. I've made a layer copy so you can see a before and after. And I'll zoom in just a little bit to the main body of the heron. Because once again, as an afterthought, I think it may be nice if I could make a bit more of the warm tones in this bird, including the eye. So remembering that the dodge and burn, we can select to, in the burn, we can make darker, and in the dodge, we can make lighter, but we can choose to do that to either the shadows, midtones, or highlights. But with the sponge tool, the options we have here are much the same, and we do the same things as we did before, keeping the flow rate quite low. But the options we have are to saturate and desaturate. Now I suppose for every 100 times I've used this to saturate parts of an image, I may have chosen one time to desaturate it. So most of the time I'll suggest saturation is going to be what we're going to use. Maybe I'll zoom in a bit more to the head. So we need to adjust the brush with those square bracket keys, and with that 10% flow, I can just enhance the colour of the eye a little bit, maybe even the colour around the edge, and if I needed to, I could actually increase the warmth of some of the other tones in the bird. I quite like them down here. And once again, I emphasise that what I'm doing here is really quite nominal, isn't it? It's not a huge difference I'm making. These little feathers here would look much nicer if they just had a bit more colour. Of course, there are going to be people watching this video who are heavily into natural history and will be spitting feathers at this point. But I'm not into that, and if I was going to enter this image, I would be entering it into an open competition. Let me hit Control 0 and I'll turn the top layer on and off, and you can see the difference I've made. Not massive, but that is the thing with image editing. The edits we do are generally small, one-step edits, each one of them insignificant on their own. It's when we add them up that they make that difference and that wow value. Maybe looking at this image, an argument could be made to going over to the toolbox, selecting the sponge, but choosing desaturate and just taking a bit of colour off of the legs at the bottom of the screen, because that colour is drawing our eye down and we want to lift up the attention into the main bird and then the head and the eye. So you get the idea of how we may apply these tools. Now I've made quite a bit of use of the sponge saturation in some images for a surfing with the alien presentation. I'll put a link below so you can view that. But here I make my brush fairly big and I can enhance the colour of the water in just those areas that I want it enhanced. But my second thoughts with this image was I've got nice green tones and nice blue tones, which are cool, but I've not got very strong skin tones here, which are warm. So maybe these are the sort of areas where a little bit of brushing as an afterthought can actually pay dividends. And I'll see you next time.